How many hours have you spent in this forsaken land, just trekking through the ruin and soaking in the silence? Think of all the times you've booted this game up across multiple generations of consoles, during multiple sessions of your life. Maybe it was after a long day of school, or during a quiet weekend when you just needed an escape. Time after time, I have found myself coming back to these ruins more than any other, because for me, it can't get any better than Dark Souls. There is specific therapeutic ambience here that no other sequel or open-world successor can quite be able to capture. I can't even count how many times I have completed this game only to load up an old save, just to stand in Anor Londo and watch the eternal sunset, or to trek down the Great Hollow one more time, just to stand on the shore of Ash Lake and soak in that ancient, haunting stillness. Even after we seek out adventures across other worlds, it never really feels like Dark Souls. I have played countless masterpieces like The Witcher 3 and Elden Ring, but none of them have managed to take hold of me, to haunt me, to make me see it in my dreams, quite like the world of Lordran did. But why does it feel that way? Why does it feel different when you walk on the streets of Novigrad or explore the great terrains of Liurnia than it felt when you were first carried away to Anor Londo and saw that golden-drenched skyline? Why, after 15 years, is this still the place you call home? Is it just a challenge? Or did Miyazaki bottle a type of lightning back in 2011 that we haven't seen since? We have seen thousands of Souls-likes trying to capture and replicate that formula, but all of them felt like there's something missing in the recipe. To find that original spark of what made Dark Souls so special, we have to go beyond the tip of the iceberg and explore why it can't get any better than Dark Souls. When we dissect why Dark Souls remains the undisputed zenith of the genre, we inevitably arrive at the most profound achievement that separates it from any other modern-day RPG, which is the map design. In most modern titles, the environment is a playground, a space that is meticulously curated for the player's convenience. But when I first stepped out onto the cliffs of Firelink Shrine, I realized that I wasn't in a playground. I was inside an indifferent, crumbling ruin that seemed perfectly content with me rotting and getting lost. This world does not greet you with a handshake. It greets you with cold silence. I remember being plopped into that hub with no objective markers, no maps, and no light to guide my path. I had to figure everything out by myself. I had no idea where to venture, and eventually wandered towards the graveyard, and was stripped of my life in seconds by skeletons I couldn't even scratch. It was extremely frustrating and almost demotivating at the start. But this is where the map design of Miyazaki shines. Discovery is earned through peril. If the skeleton of the graveyard or ghosts of New Londo strip the life from your body in seconds, the world is not glitched or unbalanced. It is rather communicating through the environment. It is a way to provide the player the soft nudge needed to understand that this is not the route as of now, which only leaves the player with the option of undead parish. Then there's the verticality of Lordran. Everything feels like it's perfectly stacked on top of each other. Most of the open-world games are horizontal in design. For example, Elden Ring, where you start at Limgrave, and even though the world is vast and huge, the progression of the player from Limgrave to Liurnia is essentially a journey across a flat plain. Even when you take the grand lifts to reach Atlas Plateau or mountaintops, those areas feel like elevated levels rather than structures built on top of one another. Lordran, however, is perfectly stacked. You start your journey at the center, Firelink Shrine, and then carve your way through the filth and hollowing. After you defeat the gargoyles and ring the first bell, you don't just move to the next zone. You begin to realize the sheer weight of the world above and below you. By the time you ring the second bell and start ascending Sen's fortress, the sense of stacking becomes so overwhelming. I personally find vertical map designs to be infinitely more difficult to master from a developer's perspective. It's a structural nightmare to ensure that every layer feels distinct, while remaining physically connected, of course. We see this perfection often in 2D titles like Hollow Knight or Blasphemous, but when it translates into a 3D map, it brings out a sense of scale that no horizontal world can match. There's a profound psychological impact of knowing that one moment, you are trudging through the toxic, suffocating muck of a swamp at the very bottom of the world, and the next, you are being carried by demons to the land of the gods, staring at a sun-drenched skyline that was physically above your head the entire time. This, I believe, isn't just scale. It is a revelation at its finest. But at the core of this genius map design is always the most fundamental aspect of any Metroidvania. And this is the reason why the map of Dark Souls feels really different from any other world. The vertical stacking of the world allows the placement of shortcuts that connect one portion of the map to another. The most famous of these is, without a doubt, the elevator in the Undead Parish. After battling through the grueling crime of the Undead Parish, finding that elevator and realizing it descends directly back to the safety of the Filing Shrine is a religious experience. It is an umbilical cord that connects the mother and the child. In that moment, I don't just see a series of levels, but I see a living organism. And this design philosophy doesn't just offer shortcuts, it offers multiple points of entry. Take the infamous Blighttown, a place that haunts the nightmares of every player. Most are intended to reach it through the depths after defeating the gaping dragon and pushing in to reach the top of the shanty town. But because the world is interconnected, there are back doors hidden in plain sight, where there is another path that reaches Blighttown, and you never have to reach the depths and lower Undead Berg to ever reach Blighttown and progress through the story. Instead, you can wander through Darkroot Basin, find a hidden cave, and stumble into the Valley of Drakes, and in that way, before you know it, you will be waltzing at the back door of Blighttown. In that moment, you feel like a pioneer who has cheated the system, but in reality, you had just discovered the beauty of the map design. By missing the depths, you effectively broke the linear progression most games would force you to do. This is why Dark Souls feels so much more personal than the vast map marker heavy terrains of modern RPGs. In those games, you feel like a tourist following a GPS, but in Lordran, you have to learn the map and carve out your path. While the map of Lordran is a masterpiece of architecture, the story contained within those walls is what truly haunts me. In most modern RPGs, think of the sprawling logs in Skyrim or the cinematic dialogues of The Witcher 3. They almost always give away most of the narrative and storyline, leaving the only thing left to speculate being the morality. They hand you a map, a compass, and oftentimes a diary that tells you exactly who is evil and who is good. But From Software has taken an extra step to ensure that every narrative and lore bits are tucked away. Or rather, you have to find those bits which are scattered all through Lordran to piece and complete the puzzle. And besides that, some bits of the lore are not even mentioned. It is just left for the players to hypothesize. And that actually is the portion I love most about the narrative of Dark Souls. This design choice wasn't an accident or budget constraint. It was a revolution. While this cryptic style technically found its footing in Demon Souls, it was Dark Souls that turned it into a cultural phenomenon. It laid the foundation for every Souls-like that followed. But few have managed to replicate the weight of the ambiguity. When I played Elden Ring for the first time, the world often feels like it's trying to explain itself to me. Even though it's a footprint of the Dark Souls narrative design, it does feel like an epic. Melina follows you, talks to you at bonfires, explains the lore of the Erd Tree. The Grace literally points a golden light toward your next objective, and overall, the world is trying to justify its existence to you. But in Dark Souls, you are nobody, a chosen undead amongst thousands of other chosen undead. who failed before to rekindle the flame before you. The world doesn't care if you understand why the Witch of Izalith tried to recreate the first flame. If you don't find the soul of a great lord and read its description, that entire tragic history remains a blank page. Compare the intro of a boss fight like Morgoth, Malenia, and Godfrey, which are amongst many in Elden Ring that have a monologue, which pretty much narrates a part of the narrative and the lore. Contrast that to Elden Ring's bosses, which do have great cutscenes, but none of them speak any monologue that tells bits of their story. You just have to get the narrative that they are trying to tell from the surrounding NPC dialogues and the cutscene. Perhaps the most emotional dialogue in the series doesn't use words at all. If you complete the Artorias of the Abyss DLC before facing Sif in the main game, you get a special heart-wrenching alternate cutscene. Having rescued a younger Sif in the past, the giant wolf recognizes your scent. Instead of a standard aggressive entrance, Sif slowly approaches you and sniffs you, and lets out a mournful howl. But as the guardian of Artorias' grave, she is duty-bound to prevent anyone else from falling into the abyss. It is a perfect example of Dark Souls' ability to tell a deep, tragic story through animation and atmosphere, rather than just using a monologue. And this has its own kind of beauty. And you cannot talk about the soul of this game without talking about Kentaro Miura's Berserk. When I look at the dark side, that burning ring of fire on our flesh, I don't just see a gameplay mechanic for respawning. I see the brand of sacrifice. Like Guts the Struggler, we are marked. We are prey to a world of horrors and decaying gods who couldn't care less about our survival. Meanwhile, in the process, it is we who become the monsters. There is a specific kind of existential dread here that no other games capture quite as significantly as Dark Souls did. There is an incredible quote by Nietzsche that captures this. He who fights monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. Nietzsche warns that to defeat evil, we often adopt its methods, its ruthlessness and its darkness. Eventually, that darkness stops being something we see and becomes something we are. Artorias is the literal fulfillment of the quote. He set out to be the shield of Lordran, the ultimate hero who would purge the abyss. But the abyss is not a monster you can just cut with a sword. It's an infection. In Dark Souls, Artorias serves as a reminder that even the most noble gaze can lead to total consumption. He is the monster Nietzsche warned about. Guts, on the other hand, lives in the quote every day. He is the black swordsman who uses a slab of iron to butcher demons, often becoming just as terrifying as the apostles he hunts. When we walk through Lordran, we aren't just playing a game. We are living out the Nietzschean cycle. Every time we defeat an enemy, every time we hunt a hollow, every time we choose to take a life for its souls, we aren't just fighting with monsters, but in the process, we ourselves are becoming the very monsters Nietzsche warned us about. To fill the Lord vessel, we have to defeat the Four Kings, a boss which can only be accessed by killing Sif, and Sif is just doing his duty to prevent the fate that his master Artorias went through. Another example is Quelaag. From the surface, she appears to be a half-human, half-spider abomination. But at the center of her tragedy, she was just trying to protect her sister and offer her humanity to ease her eternal suffering. Also, the game's silence is its most honest feature. It doesn't tell us if we're doing the right thing. It doesn't justify our violence with a cinematic speech. It simply leaves us alone in the dark with our dark side, our brand, to see if we will end up like Artorias, a broken shadow of ourselves. Or if we have the sheer stubborn will of Guts to keep our humanity intact. The combat of Dark Souls is its heartbeat. It's slow, heavy, and punishingly deliberate. In most modern action RPGs, combat is a spectacle. It's a dance of animation cancelling, flashy combos, and invincibility frames that makes you feel like a god amongst insects. But Dark Souls has no interests in making you feel powerful. It is not an action game in the traditional sense. The combat is strategic, and every swing with your weapon of choice is a heavy physical commitment. Once you press the button, there is no going back. You cannot cancel the animation mid-swing. You are locked into the momentum. If you misjudge your timing, the world will not hesitate to collect its debt in blood. In the world of God of War, Kratos is a force of nature. If you throw a swing of the Leviathan axe and realize that you are about to get hit, you can easily dodge cancel out of that animation instantly. The game yields to your reflexes, but when you are in the Undead Burg, clutching your claymore, you are subjected to the laws of animation priority. When you commit to a heavy attack, your character enters a state of total vulnerability. You are struggling against the weight of your own weapon. If there is a miscalculated distance, or if you get greedy, you can't cancel your way out of it. You have to watch helplessly as the hollowed soldier cuts through you with his weapon. The combat is also governed heavily by stamina. In Skyrim and The Witcher 3, you could swing your sword until your arms fell off. The stamina bar was mostly just for sprinting. But in Dark Souls, the bar is your soul. Every action you took, blocking an attack, swinging your mace, or even just holding up your shield, drained your resource. It's a genius design because it turns the combat into a resource management puzzle. I have had fights where the boss had one sliver of health left, and my heart was pounding against my ribs because I had just enough stamina for one swing. If I took it and missed, I would be wide open with no breath left to block. If I waited, the boss might catch me. In those seconds, I was calculating the value of my own survival. This is why Souls-likes that fail usually miss the specific point. They think the genre is just about being hard. They give the enemies massive health balls and one-shot attacks, but they forget the physicality. They forget that the player needs to feel the weight of the iron. Without that animation lock, the difficulty feels cheap. And the brilliance of Miyazaki's design lies in his refusal to treat common video game tropes as mere convenience. In contemporary titles such as Skyrim or The Witcher 3, the health potion is a utilitarian asset, a transaction where a resource is consumed to replenish a bar. It is a mechanic that lacks a soul. In contrast, the Estus flask is a profound integration of soul even in the trivial. To consume Estus is to participate in the central mythos of Lordran. As an undead, your existence is tethered to a fading flame. You are being constantly encroached upon by the cold of the abyss. Therefore, Estus is not merely medicine. It is bottled fire. By tipping the flask, you are literally consuming a fragment of the first flame to prevent your internal spark from sputtering into nothingness. Even though the replenishment of this item is a logical act, Estus cannot be purchased or scavenged from a chest. It must be drawn directly from a bonfire. You are required to physically return to these beacons of life, scooping up the world's warmth to carry back into the lightless depths. Furthermore, the slow, deliberate animation of the drinking forces the player to find a window of safety amidst the chaos. In Dark Souls, healing is also a mechanic that requires precise timing, just like a parry or a strike. To understand why Dark Souls remains the undisputed zenith of the genre, we must look at what was gained and, more importantly, what was lost in the pursuit of refinement. In the 15 years since Lordran first gripped our collective consciousness, From Software has embarked on a journey of evolution that brought other From Software entries like the high-speed choreography of Dark Souls 3, the aggressive rhythm of Bloodborne, and probably the most refined in the entry, Elden Ring. By every modern technical metric, these sequels are better. They offer fluid movement, breathtakingly fast combat, and a level of graphical fidelity that makes the original Lordran look like something that came from the era of the Stone Age. But yet, other aspects of the Dark Souls games really stick out to me. The most noticeable part is the atmosphere. I personally feel that Dark Souls 1 has the best atmosphere, not just in the series, but in the entire realm of fantasy. In many Western-themed RPGs, the elements of fantasy feel like fantasy just for the sake of being so. It is very typical. Dragons and knights exist to facilitate your hero's journey. There is a safety in their grandeur. It feels like the theme of fantasy is rather exaggerated. Take, for example, Skyrim, where all of the themes of fantasy are based on Nordic stereotypes. Nords are designed to have blonde hair, bushy beards, and the iconic Viking helmet. The world is based around the Dragonborn, who is essentially the predestined hero of legend, and the world exists to acknowledge your importance. This is shown in certain intervals where if you complete through certain quest lines, people and gods acknowledge your efforts. Your struggles are known and rewarded, but when you contrast this to Dark Souls, it is brutally honest. The world of Lordran is not exaggerated, and it is what it should be. By the time you are playing as the chosen undead, the world is already dead. Kingdoms have already risen and collapsed. Gods have fled or gone mad, and legends have decayed into long-lost stories. You do not arrive at the beginning of an epic, but rather you are stumbling through its ashes. The shift in atmosphere becomes clearer when you look at how the atmosphere evolves across the series. Dark Souls 3 is undeniably bleak. It is washed in grays and desaturated tones, a world that is dying. But the atmosphere or the vibe just feels off. When I booted Dark Souls 3 for the first time, I was never pulled back by the atmosphere. For me, the Cemetery of Ash isn't as significant as the Undead Asylum. I was immediately locked into the combat. The movement was much smoother, the running animations were faster, the swings and rolls were quicker. Everything felt faster. And that's what essentially made the world absent for me. I was so bewildered by the combat that I completely missed the environment and the world. While I was making my way to the Ludex Gundyr, I was figuring out the combat and not admiring over the world. In contrast, while I was making my way to the Asylum Demon, I was completely immersed into the surroundings, and the Hollows did not fight back in the tutorial section. I took my time, just wandering into the cells and checking in. The walls felt desolate. The cells felt suffocating. The very cutscene at the start where you are given a glimpse into the asylum, which then cut into your character leaning against the wall of the cell, was much more striking as an intro cutscene to the Ashen One, waking up in the Cemetery of Ash. This is also relevant across other titles like Elden Ring or Bloodborne, but not to the same extent as Dark Souls 3. Bloodborne is dark and gothic and really atmospheric as well, but it is also overshadowed by its combat. Something familiar is seen in Elden Ring, but in a slight different way. When you open the doors and enter Limgrave for the first time, you are met with a startling view of the world. You see the Erdtree glowing and piercing the heavens, the colossal structures and the lush greenery everywhere. The first view of the world itself is so overwhelming that you just feel overstimulated and unable to vibe with the world. Also, there are so many things to be done in Elden Ring. An unlimited array of field bosses, a relentless stream of loot scattered across every corner, and an arsenal of ashes of war. All these mechanics are not bad by any means, not at all, but they definitely draw out the attention from the actual world. There is also the map. Melina explaining at bonfires to provide lore bits, and the grace itself literally pointing you towards your next location. While the world is beautiful, the vibe is constantly overshadowed by the spectacle. You aren't just an explorer, but a consumer of content guided by a system that is terrified that you might get bored or lost. Contrast this to your arrival at Anor Londo. This is a spectacle present. Certainly the golden eternal sunset and the towering spires of the gods, but it doesn't really foreshadow or overwhelm the environment. In Anor Londo, the vibe remains intact because the game refuses to hold your hand. There is no Melina to explain the history of Gwyn's lineage as you walk the halls, and there is certainly no golden light pointing towards Ornstein and Smo. You are left alone in that grand silent scale to feel exactly how small and unwanted you are. Also, this design is responsible for the combat itself. It is slower and clunky, which is definitely a downside, but the rather slow nature of the combat overall lets you take in the environment more. You are less distracted by the combat itself, and there is no fancy ashes of war to be executed that draws you away. And this brings us to what I would call the most perfect first half ever witnessed in any game. Before you see the sun, the game buries you. You spend the opening acts of Dark Souls in the dregs of existence. You trudge through the toxic frame-dropping muck of Blighttown, where the very air feels like it's eroding your will. You descend into the depths, a claustrophobic labyrinth of slime and rats, feeling the literal weight of the world stacked miles above your head. By the time you reach Sen's Fortress, the game has pushed you into a state of mechanical and atmospheric exhaustion. You are tired. You are filthy. You are beaten down by a world of hostile indifference. And then, the tension snaps. As the Batwing demons carry you over the high walls of the fortress, the silence that followed you for 10 hours is suddenly pierced by the blinding light. You aren't in mud anymore. You are standing in the eternal golden sunset of the gods. You find yourself in Anor Londo. After hours, perhaps days of being lost in the dark, you are staring at a city bathed in an eternal golden sunset. It is majestic. It is pristine. It feels like a dream you weren't supposed to have. A vision of a world that shouldn't exist in a game with a name as Dark Souls. It is massive subversion of your expectations. Your entire perspective changes. You realize that while the world below is a nightmare of Dark Souls, there is this shimmering, unreachable pinnacle that looks like a paradise. Everything appears to look different from anything you've seen before, like a land of fantasy. It's like finding an invincible summer in a cold winter. A flicker of fire in a pitch black night. This is the pinnacle of Dark Souls. It is the crescendo. It is the beauty of Dark Souls. The lack of music, the sunlit rafters, even the enemies are grander and more alluring. Contrary to the horrifying abominations you encounter in the lower levels of Lordran, the enemies here are adorned in silver and gold. It feels like a total shift in reality. It feels like a fairy tale. The build-up till this point is what makes Dark Souls truly unique. In order to earn this, you had to suffer. Even the boss battles are literally the foundation of every other Souls-like mechanic, which is hit and dodge paired with a mix of positioning. This boss fight laid the foundation for the combat that we witness in modern From Software titles. Everything that you learned about spacing, stamina management, using the environment through pillars in this case, and patience is tested here. When we look at other games, even by From Software themselves, that specific Anor Londo moment remains unrivaled. Dark Souls 3 suffers from the problem of linearity right from the start. You move forward, relatively in a straight line. There is no feeling of being buried under the world, so there is no explosive release of reaching the top. The crescendo is a steady hum. In Bloodborne, you dive deeper and deeper into the heart of the nightmare. The world only transforms from a gothic nightmare to a cosmic horror one. Elden Ring is the closest game that has come to recreating this exact same feeling. You leave the red rot of Caelid, the lakes of Liurnia, and enter the golden autumnal forest of the land of the gods. It is the highest part you have visited in the land by now, and it truly is a warm experience. But in comparison to the feeling you get when you first arrive in Anor Londo, it's unrivaled. The Atlas Plateau is breathtaking, but because it is an open world, the tension is dissipated. You can ride away, you can fast travel, but in Dark Souls, you are trapped in the mud until you earned the sky. That is why the first half of Dark Souls is the most perfect. It uses the limitations of its world, the lack of fast travel, the claustrophobic corridors, and the physical weight of the levels to build a pressure cooker of a journey. And Anor Londo is the only moment the lid finally blows off. Yet every rise does have its fall, and Dark Souls I concluded to be a flawed masterpiece. After the defeat of Ornstein and Smough, the game's hollowing becomes undeniable. It is easy to look at the second half as a failure, but to do so is to ignore the atmospheric resilience that Dark Souls maintains even when its bones are brittle. Yes, Lost Izalith is a repetitive, eye-searing mess of copy-paste dragon legs. Yes, the Bed of Chaos is a platforming nightmare in a game that shouldn't have one. But even in these failures, there is a haunting quality that no other game captures. The second half of Dark Souls isn't bad, it's exhausted. And in a strange, meta-textual way, that exhaustion mirrors the world itself. By the time you reach the Lord Vessel, you have conquered the pinnacle of the world. What remains is the cleanup. The Tomb of the Giants may rely on a darkness gimmick, but that very gimmick creates a fear of the unknown that other areas could never do. By stripping away your sight, the game forces you to experience the world through sound and the terrifying glow of giant eyes in the dark. It is dirty difficulty, yes, but it is one that eventually makes the light of the bonfire feel like a physical rescue. New Londo Ruins captures a sense of tragedy that is almost unparalleled. You aren't just fighting ghosts. You're walking through a city that was drowned by its own leaders to contain a spreading darkness. Lost Izalith is probably the first thing that comes to mind for anyone who thinks of the second half downfall, as it's evident in almost every other aspect. But even when it was rushed through, Lost Izalith had potential. When you look past the tiled lava and the nonsensical enemy placement, the ruins themselves are inspired by Angkor Wat's massive sprawling stone structures being reclaimed by roots and heat. It was meant to feel ancient, in a way that the rest of Lordran isn't. The narrative weight of the Witch of Izalith and her daughters is one of the most moving stories in the lore. When we compare this to other titles, we see why Dark Souls is so uniquely broken. In Dark Souls 3, the experience is smoothed over. It is polished, professional, linear. There is no downfall in quality, but because of that, there is no true peak. It is a steady line. Bloodborne is a consistent spiral into madness, but it never offers the relief of the sky. In Elden Ring, the Atlas Plateau attempts to recreate the Anor Londo moment. The music swells as the golden leaves fall. It is beautiful, but it lacks the pressure cooker effect. Because you can fast travel from the start, you never feel trapped in the mud. Without the grueling climb of the first half of Dark Souls, the view from the top doesn't feel like a victory. It just feels like a new map marker. The second half of Dark Souls is a scar on a beautiful face. It is proof that a masterpiece doesn't have to be perfect to be legendary. We forgive the long walks and the hollow guardians because the first 10 hours were so transformative that they changed how we look at video games forever. And yet even with those flaws, we find ourselves unable to leave. We reach the kiln, face Gwyn, and we make a choice. But as the credits roll, a strange realization begins to set in. You haven't actually finished anything. The dark sign isn't just a mark on your flesh, it's a symbol of the cycle we were trapped in. We talk about beating the game, about reaching the final boss and seeing the ending. But in the world that Miyazaki made, those words don't mean what they do in other stories. In Lordran, the end is never actually truly the end. So, put down your sword for a moment, but don't walk away just yet. Because to understand this masterpiece, we have to take a look at the cycles. We have to look at why the fire always flickers out, and why the dark always returns, and why in a world that is defined by its conclusion, there is no good ending in Dark Souls.